Have you ever wondered what the history of Samba is? Yeah, neither have I, but I had to learn it for this project, so now you have to too. What's Samba, you may be asking? I know they say there's no such thing as a dumb question, but you're pushing your luck with that one. I refuse to believe that you've never played Angry Birds Rio. But because it's my project, I will answer your question. Samba is an Afro-Brazilian style of music that consists of fast-paced rhythms and a variety of different instruments, including the snare drum, the bass drum, the cueca, the wood block, and many more. The cueca is my personal favorite instrument, and it's the instrument that makes those funny little monkey noises in a lot of Brazilian songs. There's been many iterations of samba throughout the years, some of which I'll be talking about in today's presentation, and it's been highly influential to lots of modern-day songs and music. Samba is to Brazil as oil is to the US. They are symbiotic. That's because samba's played an integral role in Brazil's rise to power. It's also helped strengthen its connection with other countries, in particular, the US. But before we talk about that, we need to start from the beginning. We need to talk about the history of samba. Samba has a very complicated and interesting history. To reach its peak, it had to go through lots of ups and downs throughout the years, and unfortunately, our story begins on a somber note, a seemingly reoccurring theme from stories around this period of time. Samba first originated in Salvador, Brazil in the 16th century. Unfortunately, like lots of things at this time, it originated from the population of enslaved Africans. They were being forcibly moved to Brazil, and Salvador was the largest slave port in the world at this time, so there was a definite mixing of African and Brazilian culture very early on in Samba's history. The name Samba came from the word of Samba, which originated in Africa. This word was then transformed by the slaves into a circle dance known as Samba de Roda. The rhythm of Samba originated from the African-Brazilian religion of Candomblé. This religion plays a big part in the story later on. Now, skipping a few hundred years to 1888, Brazil apparently didn't get the memo, and they were the last major country in the world to abolish slavery. Good job, Brazil. Over the next few decades, freemen were able to migrate throughout the country because they were now free of their work. When migrating, many chose to migrate to a place called Rio de Janeiro. I know, I can't believe they made the movie into a real place either. Here in Rio, the African rhythms the freed slaves brought started combining with European styles of music, and this resulted in early forms of samba. The person who created the first song to be considered samba was a man who went by the name of Donga, and let's just say that Donga was an absolute legend. In 1916, while playing in Tia Ciada's house, who was the practitioner priestess of Candomblé, he came up with the song Pelo Telefone. This song was a headbanger to say the least. I actually listened to a 1916 recording of the song, and while it sounded like it was recorded on a potato, because it probably was, I was able to hear the beginning of some sounds that would define samba in its later years. I tried to look more into the song to see if it was like an actual recording of Donga, but the comments and the description were all in Portuguese, and I can barely read English, so that didn't work out very well.
I cannot read this.
Regardless, this is where samba truly took its first steps into becoming what it is today. Tia Ciada's home was the epicenter of all the first big samba songs and musicians. One of the early developments in samba was the creation of choro. This is a type of samba music that's a combination of Afro-Brazilian rhythms and European dance styles. Probably the most famous of these early musicians is a man known by the name of Pixinguinha.
Pixinguinha.
He and his band played mostly traditional music starting off. They played choro along with other northeastern Brazilian music that was considered traditional and free from foreign influence. To explain this easily, basically upper class Brazilians were like the biggest gatekeepers you'll ever hear about. Anything that wasn't like purely traditional, they hated it. It's basically like audiophiles. I don't know. Ooh, the bass is off. Ooh, the treble's off. I don't care. Sorry, I really hate upper class Brazilians apparently. No, I can't say that. I bring this up because Pixinguinha was actually the first to experience this. Let me paint the scene. It's 1921, and Pixinguinha and his band are playing a gig for the dance couple, Duke and Gabby. Well, at the gig, a mysterious wealthy man by the name of Arnaldo Bueno walks up to them. He tells them that he really likes the music and offers to sponsor a European tour for them. That's right, baby, we're going to Europe. Pack your bags and get to the airport because we're... Oh. A boat. Yeah, so planes weren't really a thing yet, so they had to take a boat to Europe. After a long ride, they eventually arrived in Europe. And luckily, they were a hit. They actually served as ambassadors for Brazil and their music. And while there, Pixinguinha was introduced to jazz and actually ended up buying himself a saxophone. After returning from his successful European tour, Pixinguinha learned that if an artist's music is perceived as too Western, or has strayed too far from its Brazilian roots, they will receive a great deal of pressure and harassment. Pixinguinha actually experienced this for himself. This is because of his most popular song, Karin Hoso. It was seen as overly influenced by foreign music, and because of this, he received a lot of scrutiny. Speaking of scrutiny, Pixinguinha received a lot of backlash for being the one to represent Brazil in Europe. Back in this era of Brazil, the population was largely white, so they were not a fan that a black man was representing them. This racism spread further very quickly. Soon after, Samba schools were banned from Carnival. After that, Samba was eventually banned in general due to people with power associating it with being a criminal. To combat this ban on Samba, Samba listeners and musicians disguised their Samba parties as candomblé religious meetings. During this uncertain time, it would seem unlikely that any future musicians would arise, but one did. It was a woman by the name of Carmen Miranda. She signed with RCA in 1928, and she seemingly became a star overnight. She made her film debut in 1933's A Voz do Carnaval, and continued to solidify her fame in Brazil over the next couple years. Besides the beginnings of Carmen Miranda, Samba was in a pretty bad place. That is, until one man rose to power. Getulio Vargas, what an interesting individual. Vargas became president of Brazil in 1930, but he was hardly a president. He was more along the lines of a dictator. He came to power by performing a military coup. I will go more into the political situation, but at this time it was so complicated that I don't have enough time to go through it. Basically, the summary is that Vargas was actually against doing the coup at first, but he decided to go through with it whenever his running mate João Pessoa was assassinated by his political opponent. He took office shortly after and reformed the country. Okay, so what are we looking at? Overthrowing a corrupt government. Okay, that's pretty good. Uh-oh. Yeah, so this guy had a big fat crush on Hitler and Mussolini.
Alerta de peligro. Este tipo era un fascista.
He was basically an aspiring fascist, and obviously liking Hitler and Mussolini is not a great look, so he really has to prove himself. Despite his terrible idols, he actually did some good for the country. And some bad. He banned strikes, so working conditions weren't very good. But he did promote an array of industries and social welfare. These changes actually helped the underprivileged communities in Brazil, and with these changes, he had a plan to change the face of Brazil. He took the idea of celebrating racial mixing and ran with it. He made it so the country celebrated Afro-Brazilian culture instead of copying Europe and trying to be a white culture. You might be asking, how did he manage to spread these ideas? And more importantly, how did he make people okay with it? The RAIDO, radio. Radios were actually a pretty new thing in Brazil at this time, but they were quickly growing in popularity. Additionally, Samba musicians were now able to participate in Carnival, but this time, they had to follow a strict set of rules. One of these rules is that Samba schools had to teach about the history of Brazil and be very patriotic to their country. All this change was great, Vargas was still mingling with the fascist party in Europe. It was a very interesting situation because what Vargas was doing with his country was the exact opposite of what a fascist leader's ideals were. These opposing actions that Vargas was participating in was foreshadowing the eventual 180 that he did. In 1939, Brazil entered the Good Neighbor Agreement with the United States, and following this, the relationship with the US grew significantly. Speaking of the US, you know who else was in the US at this time? It's our gal, Carmen Miranda. She was the first international Samba superstar. That's a tongue twister. She was dominating Hollywood, Broadway, and the music industry. She was booking roles left, right, and center. Not to mention she was getting both the stinking rich. She was an official goodwill ambassador for Brazil and their government, and she was living the American dream. Or so she thought. Because of this, when she eventually returned home to Brazil, she arrived to the booing of her once loyal fan base. Boo! As mentioned before, Brazilians really do not like it whenever we become too westernized or too Americanized. Obviously, Miranda was not a fan of the harassment, so she made a song in response to the hate called
Disseram que voltai americanizada.
In this song, she claims that her critics are wrong and that she has not changed. She is still a Brazilian. As I mentioned before though, Brazilian Samba fans at this time were professional haters, so unfortunately this song was not enough to sway their opinion. This actually would be one of the last songs that she would record while in Brazil, and she would return to the US and not return to Brazil for over 10 years. Even though Carmen Miranda took a back seat once her fan base turned on her, Samba was still chugging along. Carnival was now stealing the show. It had always been popular and attracting tourists since the early 20th century, but at this point in time it was rapidly growing in popularity. This is because they fully leaned into the eye-catching and bright colors theme that we're familiar with today. Some call it an eyesore, sore? I call it a good time. My retinas will recover. A large attraction that participated in Carnival were the competitions between different Samba schools. Each school participated and competed to see who could perform the best. Because of Vargas's policy changes, Samba schools had the opportunity to participate and cement themselves in the culture of Carnival. While the party raged on, things quickly took a turn for the worst. Vargas passed away at the age of 72. There were claims that Vargas was responsible for a failed assassination attempt on his political opponent, Carlos Lacerda. Because of this, the military demanded that he resign. Instead of accepting his fate, Vargas decided to take his own life and left a message for his supporters. The note he left said that he was willing to die for his country and that he only wanted the best for them. To make things worse for the country, shortly after Vargas's death, Carmen Miranda suffered a heart attack in her home in Beverly Hills and died at the age of 46. After her death, she was flown back to Rio, where an estimated 500,000 people attended her funeral cortege, and 60,000 people attended her funeral. Despite the conflicting views on these two individuals, their contributions to Samba are undeniable, and their loss was a blow to Brazil as a whole. Vargas's policy changes led to a sort of renaissance for the culture in Brazil, and the country still reflects these changes today. And Carmen Miranda made huge strides in spreading Brazilian culture across the globe, and gaining favor from neighboring countries. The future of Samba seemed bleak until 2 years later. Samba started combining with American jazz influences and evolved into what would become known as Bossa Nova. I won't be talking about Bossa Nova since we already spent a week covering it in class, but it obviously made a large impact in spreading Brazilian culture as well. Traditional Samba continued on too. It still lives on today in many places. It lives on in Carnival, Brazilian musicians, and Samba schools, and its influence can still be felt in many other genres of music. Samba schools are actually still very popular in Brazil. Some would compare it to the popularity of football teams in America. These Samba school events have inspired many artists over the years and have brought the community together. Just because Samba's popularity has declined does not mean that it's inferior to modern-day music. It paved the way for Bossa Nova and many other genres over the years. Instead of looking at it in terms of its decline, we should take a look back at the amazing songs that it left behind and the modern-day classics that are still released to this day, like Angry Birds Rio.